Warning, this content may be disturbing to some audiences. Subscribe, if you dare.
Every time we had ice cream at the crew restaurant, people would say it was because they had to empty the freezer to put in a dead body. Hey everybody, welcome to ANECDOSED. People ask Reddit. Cruise ship workers of Reddit. What was the biggest oh shit moment on the boat, that luckily, passengers didn't find out about at all?
Number 1.
I worked on a cruise ship for 3 years. I've got a lot of these kinds of stories, but here's my favorite one. Our ship officers got a call from a ship of a completely different cruise line, off the coast of Cozumel, Mexico. They found one of our passengers floating in the ocean. He wasn't even near the shore at all, just floating in open water. He was alive and perfectly fine. They reviewed the security footage, and in the middle of the night this guy was drunk on deck 5, and could be seen holding his phone, dancing to music by himself. He then climbed onto one of the lifeboats, and did a running jump into the ocean. He left his phone on top of the lifeboat. His body was so fluid from being drunk that he wasn't injured when he hit the water. The cruise ship spotted him and rescued him. His family didn't know he was missing because he had booked a separate room. This guy told the news that a rogue wave pushed him off the side of the ship. He was on deck 5, so the wave would have been over 40 feet tall. Don't know what happened after that. The entire crew was talking about it for weeks before it hit the news, though.
Number 2.
I worked on a ship almost 15 years ago and I have so many stories. This happened to a friend of mine. A family came on. They had a teenage son, who was not interested in the cruise. As soon as the family got to their room, he jumped off his balcony, which is insanely dangerous. They fished him out, and the family got kicked off the ship. Another fact, there is a small jail-like area, called a brig. On my ship it was on the crew floor, and it had a one-way mirror. Usually it was used for drunk or disruptive passengers. We once had an entertainer find out his ex was coming on the ship. That made him a little stabby, so they put him in the brig until the next port.
Number 3.
There are small fires in places like the kitchens that happen somewhat regularly. Most of the time they're controlled quickly and no one even knows they happened. People drop dead all the time, especially on some of the nicer lines that are basically floating retirement homes. Ironically, it's when there's a survivable medical emergency that guests become aware of it, when they need to do an emergency evacuation either by tender boat or helicopter. One of the ships I worked on, a guest jumped off an open deck while we were at sea. He survived though. I think he was super drunk more than he was suicidal. Norovirus outbreaks happen regularly. A literal oh shit moment for some people. Probably the worst accident that happened during my tenure was when a kid literally put his eye out on a ball valve handle on one of the open decks. Pretty sure word spread quickly on that one though.
Number 4.
Most of the computer systems on cruise ships run on Windows 7, including all of the automation in the machinery space, security system, fire detection system, etc. When Windows updates, it will restart the computers, as it does with a normal desktop. Unfortunately, it can also take out every computer at the same time, causing us to be flying blind until it finishes. People may be more worried to hear that there is a hole in the hull, yet they're actually fairly common occurrences in older ships and easily plugged. Fires happen occasionally. The most terrifying was a crankcase explosion. The fire suppression systems are good at extinguishing them quickly enough though, so they're not even a concern to the crew, unless Windows is updating at the time. A crankcase explosion doesn't mean the engine is in pieces. Oil mist inside the crankcase explodes and the resulting blast is pushed out through the blast doors. Also, the fire suppression system is independent. That was a joke. The monitoring system is Windows based and just means we can't see what sensors or which sprinklers have been activated. The speed and fueling controls on an engine are mechanical and the local control is pneumatic, so keeping it running isn't a concern. All of the auxiliary systems are controlled by the computer system and are passed into local control, and controlled by the watchkeeper, if and when it occurs.
Number 5.
One story that comes to mind with passengers, travel agents and family was the first sailing out of the yard. The ship can hold about 4,500 passengers, she's a big girl, and has 5 or 6 massive engines to power it. About 3 hours into the sail away, I heard a loud thump and massive vibrations all around the ship. I was in an empty restaurant and saw plates and cups crashing to the ground from the vibrations. My first thought is to always see how the crew reacts. If they are calm, you can stay calm. If they freak out, you better start moving. I could see some concern, but they continued on with their business, so I followed their lead and continued doing my work too. About 3 to 4 hours after that, another loud thump and even more vibrations, then silence. After speaking with a few crew members, we found out we lost 2 engines on the initial incident, and now we just lost the rest. Whatever the reason was, we lost complete propulsion, and this beast of a ship was going to go wherever the ocean wanted it to. Passengers were notified that we will be running late, but to continue having fun and drinks were on the house. No other info was given. Smart to avoid panic. About 12 hours later, a helicopter was seen above us dropping down crates of engine parts, and a short time after that, we had propulsion again. Passengers had no idea why we were delayed and didn't seem to care.
Number 6.
I provide software and services for most of the major cruise lines and spend a lot of time cruising. On the new builds is when you see a lot of crazy stuff happening. When a brand new ship is built, they have to go through what's called sea trials. This is a full systems check for multiple reasons, biggest ones being safety, emissions, and engine/navigation testing. This happens without passengers, and a lot of stuff breaks usually. They will list the ship, lean it all the way to one side, as hard as they can, and hold position while doing a circle or figure 8 pattern in the water. I had a 600 pounds wine cooler, fully stocked, fall face down about 12 away from me while installing a PC at a bar. It sounded like a stick of dynamite exploding from the pressure of all the bottles hitting and simultaneously breaking. I froze staring at it, and as I started to come out of the initial shock, 4 security crew members came running around the corner, no one else around except me, and about $10,000 in broken wine, and the cooler wasn't cheap either. I just stuck my hands in the air, and slowly exited the scene. I'm pretty sure if I was standing 1 foot to the right, it wouldn't have been pretty for me. Found out the yard workers forgot to bolt it down, as per protocol. Oops.
Number 7.
I used to work for the cruise lines in Alaska as management in their land-based operations. For many, many people, it is the ultimate dream trip, and cruises are the only way for them to achieve it. I loved my job, but when guests would come to me and ask me how I got here, how I liked it, and then say, "I wish I had done this when I was your age. When my knees worked and my back didn't ache all the time." So many people who were probably taking their last trips. I always handed out info for them to give to their grandkids about working for us, lol. And also, yes, I spent a lot of time coordinating guests getting their forgotten heart medicine, arranging wheelchair transport, and yeah, dealing with the occasional death.
Number 8.
Commenter: ship just arrived in Whittier, Alaska, the port for Anchorage. An elderly passenger dropped dead while walking down the gangway. A conflict ensues between the port security and the ship's medical team. The port security didn't want the ship's medical team to get involved because it technically happened off the ship and the local authorities had jurisdiction. There really was no saving for the guy, but the ship's medical team at least wanted to try, but the local authorities wouldn't even allow the chief medical officer to start CPR. The coroner had an approximate 6-hour ETA, so the port authorities bagged up the body and stuffed it in an X-ray machine storage container in port, guarded by local police, until the coroner could arrive to take the body to Anchorage. The wife of the deceased continued on to finish the vacation for the 7-day rail trip to Denali. It was a 14-day gimmick. 7 days at sea, 7-day scenic rail trip. My understanding was the cruise line comped her entire vacation, arranged for the remains to be returned home at no cost to her, and provided a personal escort/assistant for the remainder of her vacation. Person B: WTF. What sort of authorities would refuse qualified personnel the opportunity to do CPR and possibly save a human life? I find it disturbing that a port authority would rather take care of a corpse than having to ship someone to a hospital after a successful CPR.
Number 9.
Commenter: water pipe burst in a storeroom and soaked all of the spare toilet paper. This was on day 2 of a 14-day voyage to Antarctica. The cabin stewards had to swap around rolls of paper between low-use and high-use guest cabins, and it came right down the wire. None of the guests found out or realized. Now toilet paper is hidden in every cabin instead of a centralized location. Person B: the day I learned that there was an optimal storage pattern for toilet paper on a ship. Person C: decentralized is almost always a better system for storage of anything. Unless there's a high risk of theft or something and you need to pay security guards.
Number 10.
I used to be a crew member, and one time a guy working at the front desk jumped overboard after a crew party. He was found a few hours later by the Coast Guard, and everybody was asked to be discreet in order to keep the cruise running smooth, and everything was fine until the captain came on the PA and said we were delayed because a crew member jumped overboard. Then the madness begins, rumors appear out of nowhere, and the rest of the cruise was pretty much guests asking what happened the whole time. A lot of shit happens on board. I could write a book, maybe even more than one. Another time a guy committed suicide in his cabin, and his family was on board, including a little girl, but this time it didn't leak to the guests. I saw the family as they were being escorted to the security office. It felt so bad for them. A friend of mine got fired for getting wasted, got pissed and started peeing all over his cabin while the security guys were there to take care of him. He spent the night in the little jail on board before being dumped the next day in whatever port we were. Also, every time we had ice cream at the crew restaurant, people would say it was because they had to empty the freezer to put in a dead body.
Number 11.
Commenter. One time I was on a cruise, and a few cabins down a man and woman who were cheating on their wife and husband, respectively, got super drunk and fell over the edge of their balcony. From really high up. It was at night too. The whole cruise ship stopped once it was reported, and it took like an entire day to search for them. Apparently the man had his jeans or something because he had inflated them somehow and they were floating holding them. They reported that they were stung by multiple jellyfish and were super cold the whole time. That must have been the scariest, most terrible 18 hours of their lives. Person B, whoa. It's so smart that he inflated his jeans. Person C, he was more than likely in Boy Scouts at one point. They pushed that very hard in Boy Scouts. Hey everybody, welcome to ANECDOSED. People ask Reddit. Doctors and nurses who deliver babies. What are some strange/funny things people have screamed while giving birth?
Number 1.
Commenter. When my brother was born, they had to use forceps to get him out. My mom saw them and screamed, "Those are salad tongs. You are not putting any goddamn kitchenware in there." Person B. You are lucky. I had to have the forceps places twice when the first time didn't work. No epidural. I still shudder when I think about the feeling of the forceps scraping and stretching everything on insertion. Seriously made me consider stopping at one kid.
Number 2.
Commenter. My roommate and I just finished our labor and delivery rotation in July. During one of the births she was helping out in, the mom and the dad were separated but still good friends. So while this woman is pushing out her baby, she begins to half tell and half scream that my roommate should date her ex/the baby daddy. The conversation went something like this: "Mom, you should really." Screams in pain, "Go out with." Screams again, "Him sometime. He's really fun." "Dad, I wouldn't mind some drinks sometime. What are you doing this evening?" No, she did not go out with him. Person B. That would make a heck of a love story. Person C. Right? Kids, I'm going to tell you an incredible story, the story of how I met your mother. It was the summer of 2014 and I was at the hospital for your half-sister's birth.
Number 3.
Paramedic here. Delivered a baby for a lady who did not realize she was pregnant and called us for abdominal pain. Patient, you are an idiot. I am not effing pregnant. Me, well, I can see a head crowning. Patient, that must be a effing tumor. The tumor was a healthy baby girl. Mom was totally sweet afterwards.
Number 4.
Commenter. When my sister was in labor, she was screaming and our mom was trying to be comforting. "It'll be okay. Take some deep breaths. It'll be over soon." Then my sister looks up at our mom and says, "You have no idea what this is like." Person B. Pretty sure my husband said this exact thing to me while I was delivering our daughter.
Number 5.
Commenter. Emergency medical technician who did a birth on the side of the road. Woman shouted "F me" during a contraction and the husband casually replied, "That's how we got into this mess, damn it." I had a very hard time containing myself. Person B. Pretty sure my husband said this exact thing to me while I was delivering our daughter.
Number 6.
I am not an obgyn, but I was questioning a patient in the ER about some other health problem. She wasn't carrying at that time. When I got to the part about the gynecological history, I asked how many kids did she have and how were they born. She had 2 kids and were both born with C-section. I should clarify that this was in Spain and the patient was gypsy. Now gypsies are not usually well educated and women often marry young and don't finish school. They also talk weird. Now, The lady told me she had 2 kids and 2 C-sections, and I asked her why she had to deliver by C-section. She said because the first kid was a cumconio. Well, this can be translated as pussy eater. This lady was convinced that her first child was going to eat her pussy and had to be taken out before he did. You can imagine my surprise. At first I didn't understand and left the room after the questioning was still puzzled. I went and started digging in her file and found out that the C-section had to be done because after she broke water the doctors noticed the amniotic fluid was filled with baby shit. Usually when a baby shits in utero, it is a sign that the baby is suffering and has to come out quickly. That was why she had a C-section. Now here is why it is funny. In utero baby poop is called meconio. The doctors probably told this lady that she had to get a C-section because the baby comes with meconio. Comes with meconio equals viene con meconio in Spanish. Viene con meconio sounds a lot like viene cumcano, pussy eater. Imagine being told your whole life that your mom had to get a C-section because you were going to eat her pussy when you actually almost died at childbirth. I know it must not be that funny in English, but I did my best translating it and hope some of you see how funny it was for me.
Number 7.
Commenter. Not a doctor, but a father. When my first child was born his head was kind of misshapen, and when the doctor lifted him up to show my wife she yelled, "Why the F does he look like a raptor?" I lost it. Person B. My mom almost punched her best friend when I came out with my head all funny. My mom said, "How does she look?" And her friend's response was, "Kind of like E.T." My mom didn't have a sense of humor about it. Person C. Do you still look like E.T.?
Number 8.
Commenter. I'm a nurse, and one of the strangest things that I've seen happen while someone is giving birth is one patient decided to tell her boyfriend that it wasn't his baby. That made the whole room silent and the boyfriend just left without saying a thing. Person B. When my first was born, a nurse told us about a black baby being born unexpectedly to a white mother in full view of her white husband. This was in the 80s in my very conservative white town. She said both sets of parents were there and you could have cut the atmosphere with a knife. Person C. Melanin in babies can do weird things. When my boyfriend was born to white, Irish/French Canadian parents, he was so dark some of the nurses were convinced his dad wasn't the father. He has since lightened up to a pasty basement dweller, pale and looked so much like both his parents there is no question.
Number 9.
Commenter. My wife worked as a nurse near a military base and had so many women grab her during labor when the husband would step out to go to the bathroom or was across the room and say, "Tell him the baby is early or late. I had an affair while he was deployed and it is not his." I always felt bad for them. Person B. As a military wife this always pisses me off. It's not that hard to be faithful.
Number 10.
During labor, about a half an hour before the god-awful ripping and tearing, I was losing my shit. My older sister panicked and ran around the room. My mom, the birth coach, said to my sister to give me a focal point. Something to concentrate on so I didn't jump out of the nearest window. My sister lifted her shirt and showed us her boobs. Hilarity and awful pain ensued.
Number 11.
Not exactly during labor but right after, I had a very bad tear during natural childbirth which meant lots of stitches. Add to that it was training day for one of the med students and it was taking a long time. A really long time. Finally I looked down between my knees and asked, "What the hell? Are you guys weaving a friendship bracelet down there?" Both doctors, the intern, and the med student burst out laughing so hard they had to stop working. Apparently there was some issue with how the intern was stitching me up and things had gotten tense. This lightened the mood quite a bit.
Number 12.
Commenter. As a nursing student I was watching a planned C-section. The procedure was being performed by the senior resident. Everything seemed to be going well when I heard the resident mutter "whoops" and I looked up and saw blood squirting out, pulsing. She fixed the artery very quickly but it obviously freaked out mom and dad. Everything turned out okay for mom and baby. Person B. Ha! Sounds like what I do. I teach swimming lessons and if a kid, who can't swim or barely can swim, falls off the side, I casually walked over while he flailed for his life. I just pick them up and continue with the lesson like nothing happened. Some parents don't like it but I haven't lost one yet. It's also about teaching them not to freak out if they fall in. If I freak out, they'll read my body language and it kinda shakes them up. If I'm chill about it, they don't give a second thought that they could have drowned.
Number 13.
We hired a doula for our first kid 4 years ago. She told us a story that I still laugh about. She was with a couple that had been told they were having a daughter as their first kid. So like first-time parents, they outdid themselves with everything pink, sparkly and frilly, the whole 9 yards. Mom goes into labor and they call the doula to come in to be there for the birth. Mom's pushing, dad is cheerleading nervously. The baby pops out and the doula notices that the sonogram tech that said they were having a girl messed up. The dad is too busy to notice anything is amiss. So the doula tells the dad to do a finger and toe count to clue him in. So the dad looks at the baby, sees 10 fingers and 10 toes and 1 penis. Now he'd been told that he's having a daughter for the past 6 months and sees a penis, and the first thing he screams is, "Oh my God. My daughter has a penis."
Number 14.
A young couple, mom and dad were both around 18 if I recall correctly, first baby for them both. Mom's pushing and dad is doing this awkward jig, wanting to be helpful but not really knowing how to be helpful. At one point I say, "Okay, we can see the head now, still a while to go," and dad jumps up, runs to the counter, puts on rubber gloves, and gets into a football receiving position, like 10 feet away from mom's legs. We all burst out laughing and he was very embarrassed to learn that babies do not shoot out across the room to be caught like a football.
Number 15.
Commenter. When my mother was pregnant, she and my dad decided to have an amnio. A stand-in doctor was there the day she found out the results, and despite mom's instructions that she did not want to be told the sex, the doctor congratulated her on having a healthy little boy. My mom freaked out and decided not to tell my dad, so as not to ruin the surprise. Fast forward to the day of my birth, I'm brought into this bright world without a penis. The doctor congratulates my mother on her little girl. My mom responds by yelling, "You've got to be effing kidding me." Silence from everyone in the room. The doctor then has a serious chat with my mom about loving me even though I am a girl, etc., etc. Turns out the amnio results were mixed up with another woman of the same name. Yeah, quite the confuzzle. Person C, she wanted a surprise. Sometimes you get what you wish for.
Number 16.
No one was responding to the call button as my mom was giving birth, so she yelled, "Do something, honey." So my dad ran out into the hallway and screamed at the top of his lungs, "It's showtime," and I'm not a very good catcher. Hey everybody, welcome to ANECDOSED. People ask Reddit. Has any Redditor been kidnapped? If yes, what is your story?
Number 1.
Commenter. Almost, thankfully. I was 7 at the time. We were at the boardwalk in New Jersey when I got separated from my family. While I was looking for them, an older man came up and said my mom told him to come get me. Thankfully, there was a family of 4 walking by us at the time. My mom always taught me to, if I was lost, to find a family with children, because they're the most trustworthy option when you're lost in public as compared to an individual adult. I ran over and yelled "Mom," and I hugged her. I think her husband figured out what was going on and yelled at the guy and he ran off. Dad put me on his shoulders and his 2 teenage kids went down the boardwalk yelling that they had found me. 5 minutes later, one of the kids got a hold of my mom and reunited us. One of the scariest things I've ever been through. Person B. I am so impressed that at that age you were able to stay calm and remember what you were taught. Good for you.
Number 2.
Commenter. My old teammate got kinda kidnapped. Nicest guy you'll ever meet. Told me a story about when he got kidnapped. Mind you, he was a 190 pounds college athlete at the time. Essentially, he got carjacked and shoved in his own trunk. But the perpetrators just wanted to use his car for a joyride. So after a night of speeding, smoking blunts in his car, and doing whatever else, they got pulled over by the police. He said the looks on the cops was something else, thinking they were coming up on a routine traffic stop, only to find the driver owner was in the trunk of the car. Person B. The same thing happened to my sister. She was in a parking lot in the back of a video store when 2 guys came from behind her with a shotgun. They forced her into the trunk of her car, and used a machete to punch a hole for her to breathe through. They needed the car to commit a robbery and didn't want it reported stolen. In the end, they drove it around for 3 hours, meeting people but never robbed anything. They took her cell phone and called me with her location before leaving the car in a mall parking lot across town.
Number 3.
Commenter. We took our kids to the Port Discovery Children's Museum in Baltimore, and of course we all checked in together and got matching bands, etc. Our daughter was very young and at some point removed her band and discarded it. They made us show them pictures on our phones of us and our kids together before they would let us leave with her. I am definitely grateful for organizations that enforce that level of security. Person B. I've heard of people saying you should always take a pic of your kid before you go somewhere with them to help identify them if they go missing. I always wondered if it actually made a difference. I guess it really can. When I have kids, I think I'm gonna want them to wear weird bright yellow crap now.
Number 4.
When I was around 7 to 8 years old, my mom took me to a karate lesson for the first time. The dojo was in a strip mall. The lesson ended, and as I was leaving the room, for whatever reason I was the last one out, a man approached me asking if I enjoyed the lesson. I told him I did and asked if he was a friend of my mom. He was dressed normally, not an instructor, and didn't have a kid with him, so I was confused as to his interest in me. He told me he was not a friend of my mom's, but that he and I would be friends. He put his arm around my shoulder and started walking towards the front door. As we approached the exit, I saw my mom chatting with the instructor in his office through the small window on the door. The office was right next to the exit and the handle within reaching distance. I quickly reached for the door handle, turned, and pushed. The man left my side and walked out the front door before the door to the office fully swung open. I walked in and the instructor/my mom started asking about the lesson, if I enjoyed it, etc. As we talked, I asked about the man. Neither the instructor or my mom seemed to know who I was talking about and shrugged it off. After we left, I told my mom it wasn't for me and never went back. It wasn't until a decade later when I finally grasped the possibility of the situation.
Number 5.
I was in Turkey for a while in my early 20s with 2 friends. We had made quite a few friends in the coffee shops. They were mostly Kurdish and I was pretty oblivious to the racial tension there. One day walking through the market, 5 men walked up to us. The 4 beefiest surrounded us while the 5th told us we were invited to tea at his place and to come. He was all smiles, but the beefy dudes and general posture of them all made it clear what the score was. We were escorted back to a shop with a few more scary guys and the patriarch of the family. The doors were closed and bolted, and the window shades drawn down. For the next 5 hours we were guests. It started mostly outwardly polite and utterly terrifying with polite veiled threats. When they served us tea, we were sure it would be drugged, but couldn't refuse and escalate the situation. It culminated with them trying to hand the 3 of us swords, while the rest of them stood around us with swords in hand smiling and talking about how some of them had been in the family for generations and been used to take the heads off of Western Europeans in the Crusades. BS, I'm sure, but the point was taken. I was absolutely sure if we took the swords they offered, we'd be cut down and they'd have plausible deniability and could claim we attacked them or tried to rob the place. We remained calm and kept declining the swords politely as they got angrier and angrier. They finally let us go with a warning to mind who we associated with because sometimes people disappear. Scariest 5 hours of my life, and I have no idea how it ended well for us.
Number 6.
Not me, but my roommate at the time. We lived in Johannesburg and studied at the local university. One day I'm at class and he is at home. He steps outside to get something from his car. It's a typical SA block of flats with tall walls and a motorized steel gate. Some guy climbs over the gate, runs up to him and throws him inside the house, demands he gets the house keys and drags him outside to his car that was waiting on the street. He then takes my friend on a trip around Johannesburg, collecting debts owed to him. Can only imagine he is a drug dealer. After a good 6 hours of driving around, my friend is now scared shitless. The guy takes him home, drives into the driveway, strolls into the house and locks him in his room while he casually takes a shower. He comes back out and steals everything from my friend, clothes and all. Makes himself a sandwich and leaves like nothing happened. My friend is still traumatized and this happened around 5 years ago. Lesson to learn: always keep your house locked, even if you have fancy security, electric fences and all that jazz. Sometimes this country amazes me.
Number 7.
Commenter: I was kidnapped when I was younger, but I didn't realize it at the time. My uncle and my aunt were going through a divorce, and he was staying at our house with my cousin. One day he said we were going on a trip. I was young, and I loved going on trips, so I didn't think anything of it. He took us from Connecticut to Minnesota, and we stayed there for a few days. What I didn't know was he was about to lose custody of my cousin, so he took us and ran. I think he also took me just because I was there and he didn't want to leave me home alone. He was arrested shortly afterwards and sadly he killed himself in jail. Person B: how old were you? Was he a nice uncle? Commenter. I was 8 or 9 at the time. He was a great uncle. He was an outdoors kind of guy, so we would all go on hikes and go fishing or things like that. He never did anything in front of me to think he was a bad guy, but I did find out later on that he had issues with hard drugs and alcohol.
Number 8.
Commenter. Almost kidnapped in CA when I was 5. My cousins and I were playing in the front yard and 2 guys drove up. The passenger said, "Hey kids, wanna go for a ride?" As he talked, the driver got out and approached us. All I remember now is the mix of confusion and fear and don't talk to strangers. Luckily my dad walked out to see what was going on and they took off. There were reports of 2 men in an 80s model Suburban that apparently kidnapped a 12-year-old girl down the street. That last part was something my mom always told me. But she also had a knack for lying to scare me straight into the arms of Jesus. So, who knows? Person B. I was a similar age playing in my front yard and a guy drove up and said, "Hey, do you know where the McDonald's is around here? If you show me where, I'll get you an ice cream cone." And I was super excited, so I said, "Yeah, I know where it is. Let me go ask my dad." And started to head inside and the guy drove off immediately. I was sad because I thought he had pulled a prank on me. Didn't tell my dad. It wasn't until years later that I realized what was up.
Number 9.
I was almost kidnapped once. I was visiting the mall with some others and left alone to go to the bathroom, which was down a long isolated hallway. When I came out of the women's bathroom, a dirty old man rushed out of the men's and pinned me up against the wall. There was an emergency exit at the end of the hallway, and he was dragging me toward it when another dude came out of the bathroom. He was big and bald and looked like a biker, complete with a vest. He yelled, "Hey!" And the old man dropped me and ran. I was 15 at the time.
Number 10.
When I was like 5, I was playing in front of my grandma's house. I guess a man just scooped me up and put me on his back and started running. My grandma somehow quickly realized what's happening and all the kids started screaming. So she started the run after him, and as he was getting further, every woman from each house came out with their flip-flop in their hands. The guy gets scared and drops me off and runs off. Now I didn't understand what was happening. I just have the memory of being on someone's back and that person running. I remember all the women one by one coming out, imagine tightly put small row houses, including my grandma.
Number 11.
When I was like 10, a friend's mother abandoned me in another state while she kidnapped her own children. I was spending the weekend at a friend's house. The friend's mother had a manic episode and decided to leave her husband and move in with her recently deceased sister's widower. He lived in Vermont, we lived in Georgia. She packed us into the minivan at 5 a.m. and took off. Her 2 oldest children, 13 and 15, got pretty upset, so she left the 3 of us with an aunt in Pennsylvania. It was pretty terrifying for my parents.
Number 12.
Was almost kidnapped when I was about 2.5. Went on a family vacation to Germany, quite a bold move with a 2-year-old in my opinion. My mom told me we were at a train station waiting and she noticed a man obviously pretending to have a heart attack. My mom leaned over to warn my aunt that she knew he was faking it as a distraction and to watch her purse. While she did that though, a lady walked by and just picked me up. My mom grabbed me back and the lady tried to tell her it was okay and was trying to take me back, but obviously my mom kept telling her no. We found out later that this was relatively common at the train station, as it was easy for them to grab a kid, jump on a train, and quickly be in a different country.
Number 13.
My friend was almost kidnapped once. She had found some people online she wanted to meet. After much debate, I agreed to go with her to meet them in a park. Since I had a bad feeling, I brought my dog with me just as a little security measure. They gave my friend alcohol but didn't drink themselves. After hanging out with them for a while, I decided it was time to go. We started walking towards one way and they walked towards the opposite way to their friend who had come in a van to pick them up. They call out for my friend to come and meet their friend. Drunk and stupid as she was, she hurries over there and the driver grabs her arm and tries to pull her into the car. She is resisting, so he drops his grip on her and she falls back on the ground. It happened very fast and I was far away from them. So I took off the leash from my dog and took hold on the collar and got him all excited. My dog is growling and pulling against them by now, and I scream that I will send the dog on them if they don't stop. They open the back of the van and try to grab her again. Then I let my dog loose. My scary-looking dog ran growling at full speed against them, and then they let her go and jumped in the car and drove away. She was lucky that I brought my kind of unstable dog that day. Hey everybody, welcome to ANECDOSED. People ask Reddit. Reddit, what event at your job made you just say, "If this, I quit"?
Number 1.
My law firm won a huge verdict, and got a massive payout from our 35% cut, and everyone was celebrating. It was a smallish firm that only had about 10 associates, but was pretty top-heavy with a bunch of partners. According to some semi-standard norms among plaintiffs' firms, the firm cut should have been divided in such a way that each associate was looking at roughly a $25,000 bonus. Ours was primarily a defense firm, so there were no written rules or bylaws for the division of an award that big. When I say that the associate bonus was a small fraction of what the senior partners received, I'm underselling how big their cut was. I had fellow associates who were looking at this bonus for a down payment on a house, a new car to replace an 18-year-old beater, you name it. When the checks were finally issued, rather than $25,000 each associate, regardless of seniority, got $1.5K. That's it. It's a measure of how much the partners knew that they F us that when we took off for the day at noon to go drown our sorrows. We didn't get a single call wondering where we were or asking us to come back to the office. To add insult to injury, a partner rolled into the parking garage with a brand new luxury car a week later with a vanity plate with the case name on it. Within 6 months, all but one associate had quit the firm, myself included.
Number 2.
Yeah, I quit a $100K plus job. Back in 2005 I was working for a company that produced healthcare conferences. All of the sales and business development responsibilities for a couple of their events were mine, and my team included a conference producer, a marketing manager, and we shared some lower-level employees with other groups. The producer resigned to take another position at a different company, so the CEO asked me to handle her job until they could find a replacement. No problem, I added that role onto my already ridiculous calendar. So now I'm working with all of our sponsors, finding new ones and putting together the conference program. A month goes by and no replacement. Then the marketing guy quits. Same story, I'm asked to handle his job as well. Now I'm doing the work of 3 fairly high-level people and still killing my sales numbers, but I'm getting worn down. Working 8 to 6 or so in the office, going home, eating dinner and then working 9 or 10 most nights. Maybe a couple weeks later we're in a meeting with all of the company managers from the various event teams, and the CEO asks why I haven't confirmed a speaker recommended by one of our top-tier sponsors, and I tell him I reached out 2 days prior but haven't heard back. He effing goes off on me about how I'm not doing the job I'm being paid for and I need to be more proactive and all this other shit. During his tirade, every manager in the corporate is staring in shock because they knew how much I had been doing in addition to my job. I don't say a word. The meeting ends and I go back to my office where I fire up my computer and email my resignation to my VP. Told her I couldn't give notice and it was my last day. She calls the CEO and the two of them come into my office and ask why I'm leaving, and I say that I'm doing the job of 3 people for 1 salary and him yelling was the last effing straw. He apologizes, asks me to please stay because the event is about 90 days away and they'll be screwed if I leave. Nope, I'm leaving. Finished packing my desk, stopped by HR to say goodbye and let them know I expect to be paid my commissions owed, and I left.
Number 3.
I worked for a medical supply company that made respirator tubing that removed moisture from airlines. I was responsible for braiding a protective cover over the tube itself. It involved 8 very loud machines in a soundproof room. I was one of only 3 people who could do it. Me, a coworker who was on maternity leave, and my direct supervisor who hadn't done the job in 2 years since they soundproofed the room. In the summer the soundproofed room would get up to 90 degrees and I was required to wear a lab coat as part of the uniform. I made an argument that with the coat on I was sweating my ass off, and that the sleeves kept getting caught on the machine. So the president of the company said I didn't have to wear it in the room. So, I was taking a day off. I put in for it a month ahead of the day. I made sure that the company would have enough tubing for the day plus extra, and I got a call from my buddy who worked there with me that my direct supervisor was talking shit about me. And how I whined about working in 90-degree room wearing an extraneous layer of clothing that could potentially end up getting me hurt. I went in the next day, saw that all the tubing was used. I told the supervisor that it would take me a few hours to make more. She said, "I don't appreciate you neglecting your job." So I said, "I don't appreciate you talking behind my back about shit that doesn't concern you." I have 2 weeks vacation, I'm taking them starting in 10 minutes, consider this my 2-week notice. I packed up my stuff in my locker and left. My friend calls me an hour later, dude, she's bitching about how hot it is in there. I told him no shit. That's why I took off the coat.
Number 4.
I got a temp job at a credit card company. The training was almost non-existent. We were enrolling cardholders in the payment protection plan. Essentially, you pay a monthly rate, then if you lose your job down the line it allows you to miss some payments and not accrue interest, etc. Most people never use it, so they don't want it on there. We were told we were expected to add it unless the customer explicitly said no. Maybe. Add it. I'll think about it. Add it. I don't think so. Add it. I think they hoped people wouldn't notice and they could blame the rep if a customer did notice it. I drove out there on day 2 and just sat in the parking lot. I couldn't get out of my car. After sitting there for a while I went home, called the agency and told them to find me something else. I was young and naive, so while I felt it was wrong I didn't realize it was probably illegal until many years later.
Number 5.
Worked at a family-owned coffee shop back in the day. The owner's daughter was notoriously lazy, and would lounge around reading the newspaper and eating all day while bossing the non-family employees around mercilessly. I never called in sick, was the only person able to do the catering because I actually had a driver's license, and they completely depended on me. I came in 3 minutes late for a shift one day, and the owner's daughter decided that she wanted to make a thing out of it. I would have taken correction for being late from her mother or her husband, both of whom worked very hard, but I was not about to take verbal abuse from a pseudo-manager who contributed nothing to the success of the business. As it was, I refused to apologize, which infuriated her, so she started saying things like, well, don't let it happen again, you're making a habit of it. This was untrue, so I told her she needed to list every single time I had been late right then and there, because if it was a habit, surely she would have this information available. She couldn't, because it wasn't a habit, and I told her that if she ever spoke to me like that I would quit on the spot and that she would be in huge shit for it because they depended on me and she knew it. I won that fight, but she tried cutting an attitude with me a couple weeks later, not realizing that I had been interviewing for another job already and had been offered a position. I quit later that day, cited her behavior as my reason for declining to keep part-time hours at the shop to supplement my part-time hours at this other job, and she got massively chewed out by her family. Her husband's take on it was, we can't keep changing employees like we change our effing underwear just because you feel the need to be a bitch.
Number 6.
I got accused of stealing a salad. I worked as a cashier at a grocery store while in high school. Because they had scheduled me 7.5 hours, I only qualified for a 15-minute break, not a 30-minute. So I spend the first 10 or so minutes of my break on the phone with a mechanic working out issues with my car. This was before I got a cell phone, so this was in the office on a landline. I then run back to the little cafe near the back of the store that has a salad bar and make a quick salad, which you weigh and price there. By this time I had about 5 minutes left on break, and the manager was very strict about not going over your 15 minutes. 1 minute over resulted in being written up. So I stand at the cafe register for a good minute or two, even shouting hello. And no one is to be found. I quickly eat my salad, and then take the sticker up to the front registers to pay for the 1.99 salad. I go back on the clock, and about 20 minutes later I am called into the office. They say a situation has occurred, but don't tell me what. They said they are sending me home for the day. So I come back the next day for my shift, and they call me into the office again. In the office is the store manager, the assistant manager, the office manager, the cafe manager, and my shift supervisor. Mind you, I am a 16-year-old kid at their first job who had never been in any sort of trouble. They accuse me of stealing the salad because despite purchasing the salad, as our records do indicate, you consumed the salad before the purchase. I explained to them how the cashier at the cafe was nowhere to be found, and how if I wanted to eat during my break at that point, I would have had to eat it back in the cafe and then pay for it up front. I did apologize, though, and let them know it would not happen again. They tell me to go home, and that they will contact me tomorrow regarding if I keep my job or not. I left in tears. When I got a hold of myself, I realized how ridiculous the whole situation was, all the managers in the store standing in the office, arms folded, staring me down. A simple warning would have been sufficient, but they acted like I was swiping 20s out of the register or something. I go back in, find the store manager, and tell him I quit. He told me he was going to keep me, as he believed in giving second chances to people who mess up, and I tell him I'm good, I won't be coming in anymore. I'm now 31, and a nurse, and I've seen nurses go home with a narcotic in their pocket and get in less trouble than I did over that damn salad.
Number 7.
Commenter. I need a summer job while in high school, so I applied at a local grocery store to bag/stock/clean. My first day there was some sort of confusion as to what I was supposed to do or to whom I was to report. I was sent to the front counter where the customer service manager gave me a till and told me to open a register. Mind you, I'd had zero training on a register. I didn't even know how to put the till in it for F's sake. I told the lady this and was told to go do my job. Within about 2 minutes at the register there was a line several deep, and I'm just standing there with the till in my hands. The customer service lady comes storming over asking why I had such a line, and I tried again to explain to her that I was supposed to be a stocker or whatever and that I knew nothing about operating a register. She called me stupid in front of the customer, so I handed her the till and told her to go F herself. Walked down the street in my uniform and got a job at another grocery store. Person B. Almost the same thing happened to me, but fortunately I didn't get called stupid. My first day of training they just threw me on a register. I asked for help and they said I'll send someone over and never did. I walked out and didn't come back.
Number 8.
I got a good story for this one. When I was in my late teens I got a job at McDonald's inside a mall. On my first day, on the closing shift, I was asked by a lazy manager to empty the grill grease traps into large garbage sacks, quadruple bag them, and toss them down the garbage chute. Mind you, this was not the appropriate way to dispose of the grease. The right way required a longer process of taking the grease traps, pouring them into a container on wheels, then taking that down the freight elevator, and emptying into a big grease dumper. This process took about 20 minutes, but the manager wanted to get out of there ASAP because she said she had a date. So here I am on my first night of this job, and I'm now waddling like a penguin down the back food court hallway with two giants with heavy garbage bags full of Mickey D's grease. Before I get to the end of the hall, both bags split wide open and all of that oil, burger chunks, chicken McNuggets, fish fillet pieces, etc. just completely slather the entire corridor. It smelled awful. I went back into the store and told the manager, who screamed at me, called me useless and told me I had to stay with her to clean it up off the clock. I said, "You're out of your mind, lady," I quit, and threw my hat at her. The next day the store manager called me and asked me why I had walked away from the job. I told her the story and she subsequently fired that assistant manager and told me to come back, and I ended up working there for about a year or so. Hey everybody, welcome to ANECDOSED. People ask Reddit. Have you ever witnessed a wedding objection? What was it like?
Number 1.
I was a wedding photographer about 20 years ago, and the other guy showed up, and holy shit, I have never seen a group of groomsmen beat the hell out of one guy like that. Then the bride and groom went somewhere with the priest, and the maid of honor came out and announced that the company was welcome to enjoy the meal at the reception, but please retain your gifts as the wedding was cancelled.
Number 1.
I got my license to marry people online. It's kinda cool. I was marrying this sweet couple, and when I got to "Does anyone object this marriage?" someone did. The uncle of the groom. He stood up, said he objected because I love you more than your girlfriend does. Marry me instead. It was kinda weird. I am not going to lie.
Number 2.
I objected at my cousin's wedding. The dude had hit her multiple times. He was and is generally a douchebag. Every time I had ever seen him he was drunk, and my cousin, who I was previously very close with, quit talking much and suddenly became very clumsy, falling down and hitting her face on things a lot. I had no intention of going. Turned down being in the wedding party. Turned down going to the bachelorette party. My mother and aunt begged me to go over my objections. I told them why I didn't want to go. They made a bunch of excuses and told me it was just me being jealous. Ended up going, explicitly to object. The priest did the speak up or forever hold your peace. I stayed because the guy is an abusing pile of shit. Everything went silent. One of my cousins and my dad walked me out. The marriage continued. Nobody talked to me for about a year. Right after, the dickhead got arrested for hitting her in the face with a hand mixer because she made something wrong. Turned out I was right. Yet they are still married even though he has been to jail twice now for beating her. Downside is my parents wouldn't talk to me for a long time. Now my mom apologized for not believing me.
Number 3.
At a friend's wedding in 2003 he was asked if he wanted to marry the bride first name last name. Without any posse said no. Everyone was shocked, including the bride. It was like the world stopped turning for a second and dead silence together with severe tension was in the air. He then corrected that he was there to marry. Correct first name, last name. The bride's first name has been a wrong one when he was asked, but the bride itself doesn't notice. Some guests did notice as well. The official then checked and it turns out he noted down the wrong first name, which would lead to them not being married if not corrected. They are happily married until today.
Number 4.
Many years ago, the wedding was at the bride's upscale residence. They had the rehearsal, and thought they had anticipated every possibility. When the question was asked, it was too late to realize that nobody had thought to stop the cuckoo clock. Cuckoo, cuckoo, cuckoo. It was a good 10 minutes before the laughter died down enough for them to finish the ceremony. The bride, groom and officiant chuckled their way through the rest of the ceremony. They have been married for over 30 years.
Number 5.
Growing up, we went to a ton of crazy churches, including one very charismatic and dysfunctional one. The pastor's son, 17, had slept with his girlfriend, 14, and she was pregnant. She was our babysitter, and we loved her so much. Their parents decided the best way to fix their sin was to make them get married. She sobbed the entire wedding. It was heartbreaking even as a kid. He ended up leaving her when she was 19 and they had 4 kids. She had stopped formal schooling when she married to become a good wife and mother. Ugh. Makes my stomach hurt.
Number 6.
My cousin and her husband purposely had the priest skip that part because the groom's mom had been trying to cancel the wedding. She'd threatened not to come, she tried canceling venues, tried booking her own rehearsal party for only the groom's family, and started calling the bride's guests saying the wedding was cancelled. I was a bridesmaid and our bouquets were the size of basketballs. I had a clear view in case I had to throw my bouquet at her in distraction in case she did try to object at any point in the ceremony.
Number 7.
I saw one of sorts. Very small wedding with just family and a few of us close friends. The guy performing the marriage asked if anyone objected and then paused for what felt like forever, was probably like 45 seconds, then said, "Are you sure? Like really sure you don't have any objections?" All of us sat in awkward silence. Everyone knew it was a rough relationship, but the couple had not listened to anyone's concerns. 3 years later they are still married, although they were separated for most of it.
Number 8.
I was at my uncle's wedding back in the 90s. He was getting remarried and had 3 kids from a previous marriage. At the objection part, my cousin, who was his oldest son, yelled, "Don't do it, Dad." They went through with it but got divorced like 5 years ago. They were married 20-ish years though.
Number 9.
Wasn't necessarily an objection, but a friend of mine was getting married and his fiancée's mother wasn't invited. I do not know all the details of why, but from what I understood, she sort of dropped her as a child for a few years, then when she heard she was getting married she tried to show up. Anyways, the mom and her boyfriend show up and make a huge scene about how her daughter is getting married and she has a right to be there. She ends up getting pushed down the stairs by security because she was throwing punches at security trying to get into the chapel. It was a crazy experience.
Number 10.
Okay, my sister and her best friend went to a mutual friend's wedding and they told me this story. Everything was going normally and the bride walked down the aisle and it was all good. Then the officiator asked if anyone had any objections and the best man came forward and just started roasting the bride like he held nothing back. So, the groom got really upset and was like, "Why are you insulting my wife?" So the best man answered, "She's not your wife yet." It went back and forth for a bit before the best man shouted, "I'm in love with you, Derek." The whole place went silent like in a movie. Then the maid of honor dragged the best man away and they continued on with the wedding like nothing happened.
Number 11.
The most dramatic objection came from a guy seated further back in a church filled with people. As an organist, I've witnessed innumerable weddings. He said the groom was still legally married to another woman in California, that a decree of divorce had not been finalized by the judicial system. Turns out the guy was correct. Some glitch in the process prevented the divorce from becoming official, even though the groom thought it had long been resolved. Apparently, the man who spoke at the East Coast wedding ceremony was related to the groom's wife, and the guy was intent on spoiling the occasion out of some bitterness he held toward the groom.
Number 12.
When the registrar was doing the whole "will you marry take you Bill" bit, there was a loud shriek of "Bill." paused the ceremony and everyone was looking round to find the source. The source was a small baby using this opportunity to speak one of their first proper words.
Number 13.
Commenter. My mother-in-law showed up to my wedding in a black funeral-type fundamentalist Mormon-looking dress in protest. She was supposed to wear purple, silver, or teal to match wedding colors and had shown me 2 outfits she bought in those colors. But she got mad at me for not letting brother-in-law give the blessing at the rehearsal dinner because I wanted the actual pastor in attendance to do it and threw a fit and threatened not to come to the wedding. She ended up coming but in that funeral dress and frowned in all the wedding pictures and pretty much ruined my wedding. Person B. Why didn't you toss her out when you saw what she was wearing? Commenter. I was in the changing room at the time she walked in. My maid of honor, who was my best friend, ran into the changing room and said probably way too loud, "Your husband's mother is here and she looks like a Mormon." I was like, OMG. No way hubby would have let me kick her out. He did not think she was doing anything wrong. He always thinks she is not being a bitch when she totally is. She is good at fooling him with her passive aggression. She told him she didn't like the purple or teal outfit and so she wore this dress instead. He bought that story. I can't display any wedding family photos because of how awful mother-in-law looks in them.
Number 14.
Commenter. My mom and I were on my spring break of my junior year in college. We were on a little 4-day cruise and loving life. On the first night a man begins walking to a large fountain in the center of the dining area. Now this dining area was 3 levels with the top 2 cut out like a balcony so you could see all the way through. As this guy is dragging her up, she is resisting and shaking her head, trying not to make a scene. After he gets everyone's attention and you could hear a pin drop, he begins his speech. She says no. She flees. He follows. My mom and I couldn't help but wonder how the rest of the trip went since it was only the first night, and we had assumed they were sharing a room. Person B. This is one of many reasons why I would never do a public proposal. Person C. Really? It should be down to what you're comfortable with. The thing is, when you ask, you should already know what the answer is going to be. If you're about to propose, and there's any doubt in your mind that the answer could be anything other than an enthusiastic yes, give it more time. I like the idea of the big romantic display like that because it gives a good memory to everyone else witnessing it. But, if the stakes are high, then don't do it. But it's marriage. The stakes are high. Only if you don't already know the answer. I proposed to my wife at Christmas dinner with her family, right after deep frying a turkey in their backyard. I burned a circle into their lawn. It was hella romantic and intimate. Of course, being married to her doesn't stop me from occasionally borrowing her ring and doing a big grandiose marriage proposal somewhere in public. I mean, sure we're already married, but the people around us don't need to know that, and on the plus side, now they have a good story for their friends. And on the other plus side, it generally means I'm getting laid that night.
Number 15.
I was at the wedding of my mom's cousin Jay. When the guy asked if there was any objection, the mother of Jay said, "I never wanted my daughter to date such an asshole like him." Everyone started whispering and Jay was holding her tears back. I was something around 11 when that happened, still old enough to understand that Jay didn't want her mother there. The mother had to leave, and the ceremony continued. After that, I went to hug Jay. She was 20 at the time, really young. She started to tear up while hugging me. Imagine getting married, and your mother would talk shit about your future husband. When she was this young, she seemed to regret going that fast. They are still married, happy and healthy, but if I'm ever gonna get married, this is going to be my biggest fear.
Number 16.
Not an objection, but I was at a wedding. The priest gets to the objections. The 3-year-old daughter was the flower girl. Walks up the aisle, pulls the bride's dress and whispers something to her. Everyone was like, "Is the little girl objecting?" Nope. Apparently she told her mom she didn't feel good. That was about half a second before she threw up all over her. Hey everybody, welcome to ANECDOSED. People ask Reddit. Former missing persons, what's your story?
Number 1.
This is my story from a family visit to Disney World when I was 5 years old. We were at Magic Kingdom about to watch the parade. I wanted to have a better look during the parade, so I climbed a nearby tree. I enjoyed a great vantage point for the 1 to 2 hour long show. Following the parade, I calmly climbed down the tree and walked towards my parents and said with a smile on my face, "Wow, that was so fun." They were not happy. Unbeknownst to me, my parents had no idea I was up there that whole time. They were apparently freaking out because they could not find me and they thought I had been kidnapped. They had notified security, who shut down the entire park. No one was allowed in or out until they found me. That whole time I had no idea every employee and security personnel in the entire park had been looking for me. I was just like, yep, I was in the tree the entire time.
Number 2.
My parents used to take me grocery shopping at Walmart with them, but since I hated walking through the aisles of boring food, they would let me chill in the electronics section. Note, I was old enough to be left alone. They just always wanted me to go with them. On this particular day, I moved away from the video game section and over to the keyboards, musical kind. I had put on a pair of headphones and took off my hoodie, and was just playing shit that I had learned in piano class. About 45 minutes after I moved, this nice Walmart employee taps me on the shoulder and asks my name. I tell her, and she grabs her radio and says, "I got him." At this point, I'm confused as shit, so I just follow her up front to see my dad looking more scared than I've ever seen him, and my mom bawling. I got to them and found out that dad came looking for me after they had finished and couldn't find me in the video games. He looked around the electronics section and missed me by like one aisle. They looked at a couple other places, and then notified security. Security did a PA call for me, but since I was wearing headphones I didn't hear it. The reason it took so long to find me was because I had been wearing a black hoodie all day, and my mom couldn't remember what shirt I was wearing underneath. The point is, they had that place locked down. No one left or entered, and anyone not watching the doors was scouring the store. Needless to say, I got a Nokia brick phone by the next weekend.
Number 3.
My mom brings this one up all the time when she feels like making me feel bad. It hardly snows where I live, so when it does, it's kind of a big deal. I was 12 and so excited that we got about a foot of snow the past night. School was cancelled. I remember playing in it all morning, then thinking how I must try out my bright blue sled later with a friend on the hill nearby. We lived in a very quiet country neighborhood with little traffic. After calling my friend, I grabbed my trusty plastic sled to trudge out into the winter wonderland. It takes about 10 minutes to get to her house and we eagerly head to the hill. It's so awesome and we have fun for hours. After I was completely soaked through my garments and cheeks frozen, I decided to make my way home. In such a state of ecstasy from the fun I'd had, I hurry onward. I start walking up our drive and the snow is trashed. There are tire marks everywhere and all the ice is broken in the pool. What the heck happened while I was gone? I sure hoped everyone was okay. Well, turns out I didn't tell anyone where I was going. My parents and older brother had no idea where I had gone. They called the police and the fire department. They broke the ice in the pool thinking I had gone through the ice and died, and according to my mother they also had sent dogs trying to find me. They were pretty mad.
Number 4.
My parents lost me in an amusement park when I was 7. They had given me $20 to play a game and wanted me to give them the change when I was done. I still don't know what exactly caused me to become lost, but when I walked back my parents were gone. Now I loved my parents and all, but I was quite thrilled at being alone as I was a strangely independent child. I proceeded to blow all the money and have the greatest hour of my life. Eventually I ran into my parents, who had contacted the park security and were searching for me. Hugs then anger followed. Still the greatest memory of my childhood. It was quite surreal.
Number 5.
A few days before my 18th birthday, I was doing a college course in media, and to learn a few extra things I decided to enroll in a night class about Photoshop. I'm certain, and this is open to debate in my family, that I told them I would be attending this course and wouldn't be home at the usual time of 5 p.m. To compound matters, my phone died halfway through the day. By the end of the day at 9 p.m. I'm walking down the stairs towards the exit of the college when I see 2 police officers walk in and start pointing at me. My first thought is, shit. What have I done? When they call my name, I know it's me they want. I go over to them when they tell me that I'm a missing person and that there's a massive police search for me. It turns out that because I'm deaf/hard of hearing, I'm considered a vulnerable person, which made the search more immediate. My parents arrive shortly after the police contact them to tell them I'm safe and sound. There's big hugs and the usual questions. My parents got me home. My nan had just got off the phone to what I assume was a liaison officer, who wanted my parents to do a TV appeal. I'm still adamant that I told them, although we don't talk about it too much as it puts them through a lot of stress.
Number 6.
I don't know if this counts as missing person. Police were looking for me, but it was for less than 3 days. When I was about 14, I started suffering from really terrible hallucinations, partly because of a bad reaction to new medication I was taking, and was suddenly and inexplicably terrified of every single human being near me. I'd suffered from anxiety for years, and I think this just amplified it. The only logical explanation my brain came up with was to go to a place where I thought I'd be safe, which was this little rocky ledge overlooking a hill in a nature reserve near my home that I used to go to as a kid. My memory is so foggy because I'm pretty sure I was having a complete nervous breakdown. I was smart enough to take my school backpack with me, which had my water bottle in it. By the time they found me, luckily my parents remembered my special place and checked it. I was severely dehydrated and hungrier than I've ever been. My parents were so embarrassed, they kept me in the hospital for a week and said it was flu.
Number 7.
I was in the military, serving on tanks. My unit was in the field for what seemed like forever. They let everyone go back into the barracks for a night to get cleaned up, but needed some guys to stay out in the field to watch the tanks. There was an alert the following morning, and I was reported as AWOL by my platoon sergeant to battalion. His exact words were, "I'm tired of him fucking everything up, and me getting in trouble for it. I'm not covering his ass this time." Imagine his surprise when the unit returned to the tanks to see me, still on guard duty, where I was assigned the night before. By my platoon sergeant. He reported me missing because I was exactly where he told me to be. As punishment for being exactly where I was told to be, I was denied my one night back in the barracks. Such is life in the military.
Number 8.
Commenter. I was abducted from a shopping cart while my mother was shopping. I was probably 2 months old at the time. My mother went to grab something off of the shelf, and when she turned around I was gone. Of course I don't remember it since I was pretty young, but my mother said it was a pretty scary moment. Once she saw that I was missing, she ran up to the checkout lane to report that her child had been abducted. Luckily, someone knew something was up when they saw a female VA patient walking out with a baby and was able to chase her out the door and get the make of the vehicle she got into. After about 5 minutes the police caught up with her and got me back. She's still around town, and every time we see her, my parents always joke about how she's actually my real mother and they were the ones who kidnapped me. Person B. Pardon my ignorance, but what is a VA patient? Also, what happened to her? Did she get any jail time for child abduction? Person C. Most likely Veterans Affairs. So imagine an old crazy veteran with a small baby.
Number 9.
Former custodial kidnapping victim here. My parents separated when I was around 2 years old, and my mother's lawyer believed that it would look better to the court if she agreed to allow weekend visitation rights. One weekend, she dropped me off on a Friday night and returned on Sunday afternoon to pick me up, and my biological father had taken me away to parts unknown. She learned about a week later that he'd taken me about halfway down the east coast of the US, we're in the Northeast. He had me for a couple of weeks before he returned with me, but refused to actually return me to my mother. Mom's lawyer filed paperwork so that my mother had full custody and an order of protection for my mother and me, but through a bunch of legal F-ups, bio dad never actually served the paperwork. So, the police legally couldn't do anything to return me, even though I was about 4 miles from my mother's house, and she was visiting me nightly. After a couple of weeks of being out of my mother's house, bio dad decided to skip town with me again, this time crossing the country with me. It was about 2 weeks before my mother found out where I was. This was in the late 70s, so there was no digital trail to follow, no caller ID, etc., and even then, they were only able to determine which state because he would call collect every couple of days and my grandfather asked where the call was coming from. Several months after that, through sheer luck, they got an actual residential address after finding out that a pediatrician in that state had contacted my pediatrician for my medical records. I was still gone for another few months before my mother was able to bring me home. I was gone for about 10 months or so.
Number 10.
Commenter. My biological mother lost custody of myself and my siblings, so she decided to move to the USA in secret, forging the necessary paperwork to get us out of Europe. That was 2001, and she proceeded to raise us in the lie that our father had abandoned us, and that he was a hateful monster. I was on the missing persons list until a private investigator at my father's expense found us. I was missing officially for 8 years. Person B. What was it like finding out about all the lies? Commenter. It caused damage. I had to reassess everything ever. I'm still recovering mentally. The woman has done so much harm to so many.
Number 11.
In 1975 I was a 2-year American child living in Iran. This was before the fall of the Shah and America was friendly with Iran. My father was an independent contractor training the Iranian military how to fly helicopters. We lived in a beautiful home in the expat part of Tehran. I was a tow-headed white toddler with blue eyes, which was a rarity in those parts. One afternoon while my father was at work and my brothers were supposedly at school, my mother decided to go to market with her friends. She decided to leave me with a trusted maid, but this was rare. She had developed an excellent relationship with our family and my mother finally trusted her to watch me alone. My mother returned several hours later to an empty home and went into a panic. She called my father, all the other expats, and the embassy to launch a search for me. My 2 older brothers were supposed to be in school, but had skipped hanging out at the market, smoke hash, and eat pistachios with the locals. They noticed our maid and saw that she was carrying a child. They approached her and saw that it was me. She was talking to a man they didn't know. My brothers confronted her, she screamed, put me on the ground, and ran away. This caused a commotion, and she was captured by the market security, similar to the moral police. Come to find out that she was talking to a slaver attempting to sell me into some strange sex trade looking for blonde hair and blue eyes. The police took her and we never heard anything about her again. I was saved from sex trafficking by my delinquent brothers. Hey everybody, welcome to ANECDOSED. People ask Reddit. Males of Reddit, what's your abusive relationship story?
Number 1.
I'm not a guy, but I met one, Dad's coworker, almost 20 years ago who had recently left a physically abusive relationship he'd been in for 7 years. The woman had drug and alcohol problems, and had been the victim of a brutal sexual assault, which left her unable to have children, when she was young. He felt bad for her so he stayed, even though she often hit him when she was messed up. He was missing half of his bottom lip because she had bitten it off, which was the final straw for him. He left her and went to stay in the hotel he worked at. She then beat herself up, or had a friend do it, and called the cops and said he'd hit her with a guitar. They didn't even own a guitar, but he was arrested, charged, and convicted anyway. After a few months in the House of Corrections, he was released and stayed with our family for a while.
Number 2.
Commenter. I was 19 when I met her. I had just had a devastating breakup and I had just dropped out of college due to a mixture of depression, low self-esteem and general aimlessness. I was living on my own and my relationship with my parents consisted mainly of arguments about how much of a screw-up I was and how I was never going to succeed at anything. I was working full-time as a manager of a cheesesteak shop in a mall. She worked at the Hex, RIP there. She would come by daily and flirt. I wasn't really attracted to her, but the attention felt really good at the time. I was young, depressed and lonely, and after a few weeks of flirting she brought her daughter to visit me. I honestly don't know if I had told her this before, but I had been told at 5 and several times since that I would never have children, and I had always wanted them. Her daughter was very cute and she seemed to really like me, and in truth I became smitten with her. So a combination of flattering attention and a cute kid convinced me to finally ask her out. Before I knew it I was in a serious relationship with a woman I barely knew, acting as father for a child. There's where the manipulations began. Within a week she was acting as if we were going to get married. Our first fight happened 10 days after we started dating, and it happened over sex. We went out one night and she started crying because we hadn't had sex yet, and it must mean that I didn't love her. In truth I was just not ready for sex yet. After trying to explain that to her she started to threaten to leave, holding our relationship hostage, and I gave in. This became a pattern. Every time she wanted me to do something her way or different somehow she would instigate an argument about it. Her arguments were generally nonsense and revolved around my not agreeing to what she wanted because I was a shitty person / boyfriend / father / etc. And as a generally logical person I would eventually get frustrated by them. The moment I got upset she would put on the tears and proclaim that it was over and that I don't love her / them and threaten to leave. As someone with extremely low self-esteem I was certain that the negative things she said about me were true, that she was just trying to help me. She was older, she knew better. So I went along with it. Every argument I would give in, normally apologizing to her for it. This is the process that eventually led to us getting married. Instead of waiting a normal amount of time to build a relationship, a month in we were living together, 3 months in we were engaged. 11 months in we were married with our first kid. Each time it was because she threatened to leave because we weren't going anywhere and there were other options available. Any protests I put up that wasn't the case and we were moving too fast resulted in direct threats to leave and then eventually attacks on me. I'm not man enough, I'm a shitty boyfriend, father, etc. every time I would give in. So here I was, 20, married and woefully unprepared to be a father, husband, adult and struggling to get by. And at this point I had just shut down. I was an automaton, living just to serve her. I guess I was done with the fighting, the manipulations, and again, she had to be right. I was young and stupid and no one else wanted me. So I went through the motions, I worked full-time, took care of my kids, and was generally miserable. After the birth of my second child and meeting an adult friend I genuinely liked, I started to realize that I didn't deserve the abuse that I got. This came as a direct result of her now encouraging my stepdaughter to not respect me. This is the child that she thrust me into a father role with way before I was ready, insisting weeks into the relationship that I was to discipline her and raise her, and now she was being encouraged to argue with me, openly disregard me and disrespect me. At this point I started to try to fight back, and this led to openly arguing again, and eventually to her hitting me. It would go like this: we would argue, she would hit me and then play the victim when I would get upset. Eventually I would give in and apologize to her. Over 3 years this became the norm. I left twice, and each time she promised it would be better, and I eventually went back for the kids. This is also when the sexual abuse started. We had pretty much stopped having sex entirely after our second child together was born. For a while this became one more thing for her to browbeat me over. At some point she started waiting for me to be asleep and she would climb on top of me. I would wake up with her riding me. I tried to fight her off a few times, but every time she would play the victim, proclaiming that I hurt her. Besides, men don't get raped, so I eventually just kind of let it happen. I began to work overnights during the last year, and honestly that is the only reason we survived as long as we did. She would leave during the day, leaving me with the kids, so we rarely ever were together, but when we were there was almost always fighting that ended in her hitting me. In the course of our relationship I put my hands on her twice. Once to hold her against the wall and vent all of my rage at her. I left her that day, but after a month or so, I went back. The second time I picked her up and threw her onto a couch. I left for good that day. If she could push me to violence it was only going to get worse from there, and I refused to be that person. Person B. I hope you're doing better now. Commenter. We divorced 12 years ago now. I have been in a healthy relationship with my current wife for almost 11 years, married for 3. It took me years of therapy to be able to even accept that any of this was actually abuse. A large part of me still very much believed that I had deserved it all, that it was a problem with me, not her. And that doesn't even touch on the struggle I had finally admitting I was raped/sexually assaulted. But lots of therapy and the love of a good woman, and I'm much better now.
Number 3.
Commenter. Oh boy. My ex mentally, emotionally and sexually abused me for over 2 years. She acted like we were in a relationship while she was messing around with 6+ other guys. She completely destroyed any little bit of self-esteem and self-confidence I had left. She drained me for all my mental, emotional and self-worth, then she got bored and left, then she came back pregnant 9 months later. I stepped up to be the father of the child because the father didn't want it, she lost it and blamed me. She promised me a happy relationship and then I would be the stepfather to her other son she had, and things were going great, seemingly perfect, until she got bored and left again. Then I had a mental breakdown a few months later because she did some more stuff and I completely irreversibly destroyed my life over it. I was nothing but a convenient sex toy and over-glorified rebound. This is the story in a nutshell. Of course I'm glossing over a lot of abuse. These are the major things more or less. This is the story in a nutshell. Of course I'm glossing over a lot of abuse. These are the major things more or less. Person B. Oh goodness, that's awful. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. I hope you're doing better now. Commenter. Want to hear the best part? I still consider her the love of my life. I'm no longer in love with her, but I always will love her. I honestly don't want to constantly think about her every day like I do, ESP after she actually did destroy my life, but I can't help it. I really don't know why I do.
Number 4.
Not me, but an old friend of mine. He hadn't been with the girl for long before she became very manipulative. It started out with her telling him that his friends didn't know what was in his best interest, and his family just wanted to drive them apart. He wasn't allowed to go on and do anything without her. Nights out or drinking was definitely out of the question. But she could do whatever she wanted. She would go on nights out and take pictures with other men, some more inappropriate than others, then accidentally send them to him. Then laugh when he'd get upset and say that it was just a joke. She'd always hit him during fights, scratch his face, but as a firm believer in never putting his hands on women, he wouldn't probably defend himself. He finally ended it when, during an argument, she threw a new boiled cup of tea at him, missing his face but scarring his shoulder and neck. I've unfortunately lost touch with him, but I really hope he is happy. He was an amazing friend to have. I was lucky to have that chance to get to know him. He deserves the world.
Number 5.
Well, one girl I dated I was with for 7 months. She constantly made me feel guilty about things. Always blaming things on me and just in general being a shitty human being. For instance, on several instances I caught her flirting with several guys including her ex. I know I should've noped out of there. I was in a bad place in life at the time, and she would always make excuses and turn it around on me, and somehow I was the bad guy. For instance, at one point she was discussing in front of me and other friends via a Discord chat her kinks with her ex, and she thought that was okay. Another time she was literally letting some guy tell her he loved her and calling him baby and shit. She told me it was a roleplay that was some collaborative writing project that never got sexual, until one time I caught her and it did, and she got mad at me for calling her on it. She also said the fact that I wouldn't have sex with her must have meant I didn't really love her. Not her exact words, but it was something like that. Let me be clear, I did want to have sex with her at the time, just not when I did. I had the desire but wanted to wait. A month after that I basically caught her undeniably cheating on me. Technically I didn't have proof, but the circumstances, if you want specifics ask, but it's a long story, kinda made it obvious. When I found this out I told her I wasn't comfortable with what she was doing and she dumped me, telling me I was controlling. I am not proud to admit this, but at the time part of me denied that she was cheating, even though she later admitted to ID in an email. So I had emailed her, she blocked me on everything else, trying to apologize, even though I now know I was manipulated and that I didn't do anything wrong. She tried to string me along, then told me she reconnected with someone, a mere 4 or 5 days after the breakup. Yeah, no, you don't end a 7-month relationship and start a new one 5 days later unless you already had that in the works before it ended. She also used to do things like cry when she didn't have money for food or to pay her rent, so I would buy food for her / give her money for rent, and she'd act like it wasn't her fault, when in reality her money was being spent on Netflix, weed, and other shit she didn't need. There were a lot of other things that happened, including her getting kicked out at one point, and I had to find a place for her to stay and call in a lot of personal favors. She couldn't stay at mine and my parents' house. It's complicated, and yet it was just a mess. I can't believe I am summarizing here. There was so much that happened, and it all ended 6 months ago. I guess it's on my mind so fresh because she recently tried to contact me. I didn't respond, nor will I. I just don't want to remember her. She was awful. She keeps contacting me and I can't figure out how to block her email. Make sure to share your personal story in the comments below and have the opportunity to be featured in a future video. Also, if you like these topics, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification button to continue seeing more content like this every day. See you next time.